Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Public Allies platform. I'm your host, Ayesha Sardar, for today's roundtable, which is on equity, equality, and health. Each of us identifies with multiple communities and different identities, and it can be uncomfortable to talk across differences. We may prefer to avoid sensitive topics or gravitate towards conversations with those we assume to share our background or perspectives. Perhaps we shut down when faced with strong opinions or confuse intuition with fact. However, in not talking across difference, we deprive ourselves and our communities of opportunities to grow, be challenged, and understand more fully the experience of others. While dialogue alone does not solve structural problems, it is a good place to start. The purpose of today's roundtable is to stimulate discussion and promote awareness and dialogue about the meaning of equity, equality, and how it's related to healthy community and the implications for action within the community framework. So, without further ado, let me introduce today's speakers to you. Starting in alphabetical order, we have Ali Abbas Mehboob Hijri. He works at the AI Hub and the Center for Cyber Innovation at Durham College and has over 14 years of experience working on a variety of technology implementations in the government, academic, and not for profit sectors. With a specific interest in broadband communications, Ali has held senior roles in projects to enable remote connectivity, implement technical trainings, bolster cybersecurity frameworks, and enhance access to mission critical applications. He has also taken a lead role in security funding for over 15 related projects and established numerous public private partnerships. He has worked with over 65 companies, deploying prototype, and quite recently led the development of 5 distinct cybersecurity projects. Ali is completing his PhD in communications and holds multiple research and teaching positions. He has recently been appointed as the lead of the Cyber Exchange Advisory and is working on a task force to deploy and scale secure communication protocols for SMBs. Ali is also part of international research groups and is currently teaching at 5 institutions across Canada. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure, but more importantly, yes, you mentioned I teach and all of those things, but my motto is to teach is to learn, and I'm looking forward to learning from everybody that's on the panel today. So thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Next, we have Jana Tsang. She is the principal lawyer at Tsang Law with 12 years of experience practicing family law and wills and estate planning. Jana assists her clients in all things family law, from negotiating cohabitation agreements, marriage contracts, custody or separation agreements, to litigating contentious separation divorce proceedings. Jana also helps her clients in creating and updating their wills and powers of attorney documents to ensure that the proper decision makers and beneficiaries are in place. At the same time, working with her clients on tax minimization strategies to reduce estate administration tax payable on death. Welcome, Jana.
Thanks very much, Ayesha. And I'm in awe of my fellow panelists here. So like Ali, I'm very much looking forward to learning from my fellow panelists today.
Yeah, thank you. Next, we have Justin Trottier. Justin, I hope I pronounced that right. He is the founder and National Executive Director of Canadian Centre of Men and Families, a hub of health and social services for boys, men, fathers, and families. After building facilities in Toronto, Ottawa, St. Thomas, and Calgary, he led the initiative, which is on track to open the first emergency family shelter for abused fathers and children this April 2021. Previously, he played a leadership role in a variety of humanist and secularist organizations, in particular the Centre for Inquiry Canada, where he served as executive director for 7 years. Justin is also a passionate advocate for public science education and hosts the Star Spot, an astronomy-themed radio show and podcast. Wow, Justin, welcome.
My interests are a little bit eclectic, but thank you for that kind introduction. And I'm glad to be joining my fellow panelists today for a fascinating discussion.
Thank you. Last but not least, we have Sandra McKechnie. She began entertaining audiences over 25 years ago as a dynamic, soul-inspiring songstress, lyricist, and producer. She was led to incorporate double consciousness, 2Bs, into her creative portfolio, further elevating the spirit of listeners through her public speaking. The reviews for these presentations are no less than inspiring. Double consciousness is the culmination of Sandra's personal research and exploration, triggered by an urgency to delve deep beneath the surface of Black history as it was told. She shares her findings in a stimulating, upbeat fashion with numerous details impacting the fate of two distinct groups of people. The information remains very relevant and inclusive, encompassing all race groups. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you. Good to be here with everybody. Appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much, all of you. I can't thank you enough because it is so difficult to find the right people. And when we find it, we are so happy about it. So if I have missed something, I would love for you guys to add to it. Have I?
I think you've covered everything really well. I think it's more important also we hear a little bit about you. You've done a lot. So what got you interested in this topic? So why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh my God, you're turning the tables now, Ali.
Have to. You asked. The silence was awkward, so I decided to turn this on you.
Okay, so the topic, because a lot of things are happening around us, and sometimes these are the topics which we are scared to touch. As not-for-profits, as people in the community, if we start a dialogue on these topics, we believe at Public Allies, it is important to bring awareness. We are not saying, transformation is going to happen overnight, but we are saying a dialogue, an awareness.
Yeah.
It should be important for people to openly talk about it without hesitation, without having stigma around it. So that's the reason we are here.
Fantastic. Well said. So I think that was a great way to jump into things. Thanks, Ayesha.
So let's start. So we are trying something different today. Our roundtables always are like, we ask a question and you all answer. But today is more of a discussion because we didn't know how to wrap ourselves around questions in this particular on this particular topic. But let's start. I want to know, how is equity different from equality? Are all humans treated equally? What is the difference between gender equity, gender equality, and how does it impact the health of society? So what do you guys think? What is equity, equality, health equity? These are all confusing jargons, and sometimes they are used interchangeably, but they have a different meaning.
Right.
So I want you all to tell the viewers what it is. Let's go in alphabetical order. Ali, go on.
Well, I thought we were going to start with Sandra because Sandra has the double consciousness and the Frantz Fanon concepts of hybridity. So I thought we would go into that. But anyways, I don't have an issue to jump into it. I'll take a minute or two and explain my perspective. But I really want to hear from my colleagues on the panel. So I've always mentioned to my students that we always talk about we need to get more diverse voices to the table. And when we talk about this, we always talk about this concept of we need to promote, and this is how people talk about it. We need to get more equality. Let's bring more women to the table. Let's bring more trans folk to the table, etc. And I think that's great. And a lot of people can pay lip service to it, but also make it happen by bringing diversity to the table. My question there becomes, sure, you might have checkmarked the equality piece. Equity is about when they're at the table, how much of a voice do they truly have when they're there at the table? That to me is equity. When you talk about equity, it's not just that, yes, we checkmark the fact that we can have diversity in our companies or diversity in our teams. It's when those diverse voices are speaking, are you actually listening to understand or are you listening to reply? And that for me is where equity comes in. Sacha Baron Cohen always says, right, in his Ali G character, check yourself before you wreck yourself. You really wreck yourself when you pretend We have equality at the table because we have diversity at the table, or we have multiple people at the table from different groups, etc. It really comes down to the leaders of groups and how they're listening to those voices and how they're acting upon those. One of the biggest things, which is why I keep emphasizing this with my teams, is that when you are pushing an equity stance, the equity stance requires you as a leader to be first and foremost a very well thought through communicator and listener. Often what we have is we have people listening to reply, but not listening to understand. For me, equity is you've brought voices to the table. Now they shouldn't just be silent voices there. You should be listening to understand that. That is equity. And when I translate and I parlay that into a step further, equity demands much more of us than equality alone. When we talk about equality, we can call out some bad practices. We can call out some dangerous tendencies in our society because we're pushing for equality. But when we talk about equity, as my colleague on one of my boards, Karen Namani, says, equity is not about calling out, it's about calling in. You need to call people in and have conversation. And that's an extremely difficult thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. That was wonderful.
I think we're going alphabetically. Sorry.
It's okay, Sandra. We will let you go.
I love what Ali said, and I want to add a little bit more to that without going into the 8 hours of double consciousness fundamental training. Anyway, when I look at equality, because that's one of the things via sub-Saharan trade, apartheid, all of the ma'afas that people have gone through, our indigenous brothers and sisters, Latinx, and on and on. So when we think of equality, when everything like upon the 13th Amendment, everything was great, everybody's free, but then the 13th Amendment came in, and I always think, though I'm in Canada, we are borderless when it comes to, we're a little more sanitized in Canada, but when it comes to the way we are viewed, it's very similar, right? It's sanitized right here in Canada. But anyway, when you think of equality, everybody's free, and then after the civil rights movement and after people were able to, the acts and the policies, so it was like, they can drink from the same fountain, stop that. Stop dehumanizing those black people. So we think it's on, and then people start to talk things like meritocracy, that is pulling up yourself by your bootstraps. We're all even now, right? We're good. Everybody good? So when I think of equality, and then I think of equity, equality can be very unfair if you're talking about us being here, right? When some of us have been here. So you're giving the same thing. You're not meeting the need as far as I'm concerned. You're giving the same thing, and in comes equality and says, let's just give everybody the equal. Well, these people need a little bit more care, health care, dental care. They need to pull them up. Parity. So are we at par? Of course not. So equity and equality, they are interchangeable, but with the equality, you're handing everybody 10 apples. But there's some of us that started with 500,000 apples and some that started with 1. So that can be a little bit deceptive,
Yeah.
Just a bit deceptive when it comes to that. So when we came, so now everybody's good, and we've come across. So I'm reading there's 2 people that I do a little research on when I do double consciousness. There's a whole plethora of them, but these 2, Mirza Baradaran, The Color of Money, and Dr. What's his name? Not Olstein. Anyway, The Color of Law, The Color of Money. These are amazing books. The Color of Law and The Color of Money, and it's about what's the color of money? Well, it's not black. But I'm saying when it comes to intergeneration, there's a difference between wealth and, right? Yeah. You're having a great income in the 21st century, and then your paycheck. There's a difference between wealth and your paycheck. So these 2 sort of were in agreement with the fact that the world would have to freeze if we're talking about equality for many people, or indigenous or blacks, brown and black people, the world economics would have to freeze for us to have equality. Okay. So meanwhile, back at the farm, there's still disparities. That's my 2 cents on that particular part.
Thank you, Sandra. No, that helps. Jana, you're next.
It's a very hard act to follow for both Ali and Sandra. And so I think, just building on what they are saying, I think part of it is having more people recognize that people have different starting points, right? Because of systemic or inherent racism or gender roles or gender biases, we're not all starting at the same starting point. So equality is not really going to get people who actually need the help anywhere. And then that's where the equity comes in, right? It's giving opportunity to the people who have been racialized or biased because of their gender or sexual orientation or whatever the case may be. It's giving them more opportunity. It's recognizing and understanding that they need more than what someone would get from versus like an equality standpoint. And yeah, so I don't know if there's much more to say from me at this point, but I think one of the things that comes back to me on a personal level is I think the self-education part. So being more aware of the differences and where it is that you can help in your own life. And then the education part, in talking to friends, to families, to the next generation, I'm trying to be much more mindful when I'm talking to my nieces, they'll tell me something, oh, girls don't do that. And I would be very vehement on well, no, girls can do whatever we want because it doesn't really matter. And so just trying to sort of reinforce that for our next generation to hopefully, continue to improve and to bring equity into equality. So bring everybody to a place where equity is no longer an issue. And then it's just a matter of, dealing with equal access at that point.
Thank you, Jana. Justin, over to you.
Yeah, it's good coincidence that you kind of ended on that note, because that was one thing I wanted to comment on, was the intersection between, or the interplay between, equity and equality. The way I see it, equality is the ideal, but we're not nearly ready to introduce it into public policy yet, and equity is a tool we use in the interim to get people to a place where equality can kick in and would actually work. So what I wanted to add to this discussion is to maybe wrestle a little bit with the limits or the pitfalls around equity policies. So I want to focus my comments there, not because equity isn't an important framework, but just because we shouldn't have any blind spots about some of its limitations, or be ready to navigate those pitfalls. So one thing I want to make sure is that we're not fighting inequality by reintroducing it in other, maybe more subtle ways. One thing I think equality or equity needs to do is to be customized as much as possible to each individual. And that's a little bit hard to do because we usually think of equality as focused on the individual and equity as more of a group-focused kind of framework. But I think what we need to do is get beyond that and look at policies that go maybe a little bit deeper than focusing solely on the membership of an individual in big groups like gender, race, or ethnicity, and to understand that people are more complicated than that they are individuals, and that policies need to somehow reflect the intersection of more of those factors that make up an individual, make them a unique person. Gender, for example. So if we compare a white woman, but she's raised by a loving family with economic means, as against a man who we tend to think is privileged, but maybe he's a racialized man, maybe he was born with severe physical health problems, maybe his family is not of high socioeconomic means, does it make sense to just look at one of those factors, namely gender, and have policies that would favor one individual over the other just because they happen to be part of one of those large groups? Another pitfall for equity is when it sometimes can foster competition between groups for underprivileged status. There was one recent example, it was a controversy at Harvard University, I think other universities were also guilty of this, where they were limiting the number of Asian students because they were trying to foster more representation from other groups, and it ended up kind of pitting one group against another in a very unhealthy way. And I think this speaks to a bigger problem potentially. Equity's focus on the numbers of people of various groups may be aimed too superficially. It may miss wrestling with more underlying, deeper systemic problems that if we did wrestle with them and we were successful, we'd have a more permanent and long-lasting effect on those communities. And I would say lastly, we should be more nuanced in understanding the intersection of power and privilege, and be prepared to apply equity policies on behalf of different groups or maybe different combinations of groups depending on the situation. So not a kind of one-size-fits-all approach, but looking specifically at the factors at play in a given social situation. So look at workplace policies, for example. It's undeniable that women historically and in the modern day as well face barriers in certain workplaces. And thankfully we have programs, many of them around the STEM professions, to try to encourage more women into those jobs. But I think we should be prepared to look at, for example, workplaces where maybe men are underrepresented, maybe nursing, maybe early childhood education, maybe teaching. Maybe there should be programs that encourage men or change the way we socialize men so they are more likely to venture into those professions. And the result would be, in the case of the teaching professions anyway, we'd have more positive male role models for our young children. We might wish to see preventative health programs that encourage men to take better care of their health. Men are notorious for underutilizing healthcare supports.
Yeah.
Another final example on that thread would be maybe workplace safety programs that teach men it's okay to ask for help or to refuse dangerous work. That would respond to statistics that over 90% of workplace fatalities are men. So there's a lot there we don't talk about. I mean, obviously, I'm the director of the Center for Men and Families. I'm focusing on men and gender, but you could take other groups that we often kind of forget about and look at the nuanced details of different scenarios and different situations and start to dive a little bit deeper, but get beyond just looking at people as falling into one or another kind of big lump sum group and forgetting that each individual is unique. And we often require policies that reflect that unique diversity that makes each of us a special human being. So I hope I haven't, ruffled any feathers there, but I just wanted to make sure that we're covering all of our bases for what I'm sure will be an intriguing discussion to follow.
No, absolutely, Justin. That was very interesting because you bring a different perspective altogether. Because, talking about groups, I feel it becomes easier for the system to put people into groups and come up with policies. That's the whole reason for that. And when we talk about equality, like you said, it becomes important because we get a safer, a free society, which is thinking about the growth perspective. When you have people who are treated equally, it becomes safer for everyone. But then it doesn't, but there is also the fact that like Sandra and Jana and Ali and even yourself, you said I'm just echoing everything. I'm just summarizing, guys. So it doesn't take away from the fact that, everybody doesn't start at the same place. So there are differences there. And if you want everybody to come at an equal platform, you need to provide that step for them to climb up. So anybody wants to add something? Go ahead, guys. This is your time.
I was going to add that with all the intersections of equality and equity, I look back and I think we're still, for many, it might look different. We're still in the civil rights movement in terms of where we're coming from. So, and it's almost like with all these intersections, there's this diverting of the issues fundamentally that needed to be, a lot of issues that needed to be looked after for the Indigenous, for people of color. And so you have this, people are diverting with all of the intersections that are coming up. The civil rights movement was amazing, and the gay rights movement spun right off of that, and there's so many ways we've been left behind. And so we kind of have to go back historically and look at that sometimes. And I was really loving what Justin was saying, and I think that sometimes right now and here, people want to make policies and do all this stuff, and I'm thinking, wow, fundamentally, do people really know the history? If I didn't take a little training, and I don't even know anything really about the Indigenous, but it's just taking that 101, that get the 411, on what my precious brothers and sisters, the Indigenous community, First Nations went through. It gives me an insight then, in case I had a political agenda of any kind, how I'm going to view them, what lens am I looking through. And it's the same with when we do our webinars. We just want people to get the lens of what this really looks like, so they can understand the real disparities and how to go forward politically.
Well said. Yeah.
Well, as
Jana,
Ali
Ali?
said earlier, it does come from listening more than
Yeah.
speaking, I guess, or thinking you have all the answers, but understanding that we might all have blind spots and being open-minded enough to look for them, I suppose, on an active basis.
Yeah. How many times have you seen, like, there is a problem and people are listening, like you said, are listening to just, reply back and not to find the solution. It's like you're listening to them, you go back, and life is just the routine like it was before. There is no change that happened. They say that, it'll come, you're talking about everything, send us the info, tell us what we can do, but how much is being executed there, right?
Yeah, I love what Ali said too. Like, there's a lot. There's the
Yeah.
doing. Like, what do we do? Even in our webinars, we say to people, okay, it's not about fault because we're here in this wonderful space, and everybody's got stuff, and we got everybody in the room. But what are we going to do? And one of the things we tout is saying it's not your fault, but choose to do something about it. It's not your fault, but choose to do something. Whether you hear a family member saying something that is dehumanizing about another group, or I was on a job and I heard there was a friend of mine. He identifies as a gay man, so I heard people. They were like there was some heavy slander going on, and I happened to hear, and of course because I cared about him as well, right? Still do. I had to jump in because it was like, excuse me, um, mm, you know. So I don't think it doesn't matter to me so much whether I agree with how people are conducting their lives or whatever. It's an issue of respect for the individual, and I think that those are things that we speak about. What can we do? What is it that you can do if you hear someone calling someone? You're saying something about a black and brown
Yeah.
people, mixed race people, indigenous beings up at a family gathering. What are you going to do? Where's your self-awareness around that? Or maybe you don't have any. Maybe you haven't taken a course, or you haven't done a webinar or a training. And I can appreciate that because sometimes you don't know till you know,
Yeah.
and so you might just let it pass. But I think the more of these wonderful things that we participate in, like this,
Yeah.
and get an awareness of I'd love to know what Justin does because we do a lot with, in terms of, I'm doing a webinar for men coming up, and I was just so curious as to what, so I'll have to get in touch with you, Justin.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just
Definitely.
really think, I love, what are we going to do about it? It's not
Yeah.
your fault, but what can you do?
But Jana, I wanted to know, like, when we talk about equity and equality, like, when separations happen, when you're looking at people there, and also the health system around you too. How much of it is equal, and how much of it, is the system actually doing justice?
Well, the system is never going to be perfect. It's not. It's the system that we have to work within. And so, as lawyers, we do the best we can for our clients. And that being said, and I think we've had discussions around this before, where there is legal aid set up in Toronto for people with lower income to access lawyers to help them through their legal issues, whether it's family or sort of on the litigation side. But there's a huge gap in terms of funding that's actually being provided, and that's funding that's decreasing depending on who's in government, and so you have sort of the extreme low end income people who definitely would benefit and would need those services, but then people who are working because they need to put food on the table, and
Yeah.
they've just made enough over to not qualify for legal aid. Now they're left out in the cold. And as lawyers, there's people that will take on files at reduced rates or sliding scale and that type of thing. And I think that's what a lot of lawyers are doing. But certainly, I think there's much more that should be in place to help people through these difficult. I mean, it's difficult enough for people to go through a separation. It's a breakup of a family. Now, you're separating into two households households, what is that going to look like? You know, what are the emotions that is being passed down to the kids, right? And how is everybody handling all of it? Like, you know, on the one level, you know, on my end, we look at the legal side. So, you know, we look at, you know, what time sharing arrangements would be in place, and, you know, how property is going to be divided, what support is going to look like from one side to the other. So we can help on those types of things. But what I find is that we work so much in silos. So, you know, I encourage my clients to, like, you know, anytime I come across a potential client and, you know, they're going through a separation, I always encourage them to go talk to a counselor, because it's not just dealing with, you know, the kids in and of themselves in terms of what the kids have to go through, but it's also what they have to go through emotionally, and in the context of, you know, where they are financially. You know, what does this mean for their family, and you know, is this a matter of, you know, them having to relocate, to move neighborhoods because they can't afford to stay in the same neighborhood anymore? What's that going to mean for the family? And with the way that our court systems are structured, and with the timelines that are built into the court systems, I mean, it's good that we do have timelines, but at the same time, the timelines currently are so far out because we've also been impacted by COVID in terms of our court operations, that sometimes it is really hard for, you know, now maybe mom is staying home with the kids, or maybe dad's staying home with the kids and the other parent's working, but the parent with the income is making things very difficult for the primary parent, and getting support flowing that way. So it is a definitely not an equal or equitable system to work within. And all we can do really is to support our clients the best that we can, to try and help and find resources for them. And what I'm trying to do, or be more mindful of, is to refer resources to my clients for their kids as well. So, like, you know, referring them to community programs so that they're not just sort of stuck in the same situation, that they have different people to talk to, they have different community mentors that they can engage with, so that, you know, if it is, you know, not to sort of pigeonhole somebody, but, like, you know, if it's a lower income family, and you know, I've helped families with, you know, a single mom with kids and, you know, daughters growing up and, you know, having kids at age 18 themselves, and sort of perpetuating the same cycle. So trying to direct them to resources that enables them to break out of it, to have access to these opportunities.
Well, I love everything you've said, Jana, and I'm wondering if maybe you could comment on the role of potentially mediation as an alternative in cases of a potentially high conflict separation or divorce, in order to lower the temperature a little bit, bring the parties together, avoid a winner take all outcome, which is often the way in which, you know, well, many proceedings in front of a judge go, but that includes family court as well. Do you see more of an emphasis on mediation, or more clients who are interested in considering that? And I think this is an equity conversation, because the winner take all system we have right now actually promotes an unequal division, where one parent typically becomes the primary caregiver, and putting a gender hat on for a moment, it's usually mom. And that may be even when both parents are willing and able to be, if not 50-50, maybe something close to it, like 40-60, but it ends up being a winner take all, and the non-custodial parent becomes, like, an every other weekend, typically dad, it can be mom. But going through mediation, or what we favor from a public policy point of view is equal shared parenting being the default presumption. We think that would reduce those tensions, but that's a whole other debate. But do you think mediation could be a way of coming up with more equitable distribution of resources, childcare time, lowering the burden on mom to always be assumed to be the primary caregiver, all of that?
Absolutely. And there's definitely a trend towards more usage of mediation. The difficult part with mediation is that both parties have to agree to engage in the process, right? Whereas, you know, if someone if they're forced to go to court because the other side's being unreasonable, then that's sort of the only avenue that they can take. There are certainly, I mean, within the court process in and of itself, there are structures in place to, it's sort of, we have the initial steps in the court process, we have case conferences or settlement conferences. So a lot of those are set up to not so much mimic mediation, but it's a judge, sitting down with the two parties and saying, okay, well, based on what I've read, based on what you guys have told me, this is what I would order as a judge. I would strongly recommend you guys to, maybe take half an hour outside to have a discussion, see if you can come up with an agreement that's sort of similar to what the judge would order or something like that. But back to mediation, definitely people should take advantage of mediation and should engage in the process. The issue, I think, at the end of the day is having knowledge of what they are entitled to, and then making informed decisions from that point. And so I think the education piece and sort of having access to legal information and legal knowledge would really help people, regardless of sort of their financial circumstances, right? Because, if I'm just going by, oh, well, Aunt Jody told me that, if we separated, and I'm the mom, then I would definitely keep the kids, and, he doesn't get any time at all with the kids. Like, that's not the presumption at all. But a lot of times people rely on what they have heard in the community or through friends and family. That's not actual factual information. And then they make potentially poor choices as a result of that. So I think, encouraging, the people around you to get access to information, to, if they are going through a situation like this, to talk to a lawyer. Some lawyers charge for initial consultation, some don't. So, whatever their financial circumstances are, whatever they can afford, but, get information before you make decisions on, where you would go next, or, where the kids are going to live and all of that.
Thanks, Jana. Ali, you're sitting quiet, but I want to ask, in the space that you work in, like cybersecurity, there is so much to talk about there, about equitable and equal rights when somebody is like, I don't want to say the colleges, the students, and the space itself. Or how do you deal with that in those spaces?
Yeah, so one of the things that I always follow is, I set a little bit of a canvas, a bit of a mandate in terms of how I operate, right, within the classroom environment, and how I operate with my colleagues and my student colleagues, etc. In the classroom, often it's believed that, oh, we're all in the same boat, we're all here to learn, etc. And the reality of the matter is sure, we're in the same ocean. Some people are in a very expensive yacht, some people are on raft, some people are barely able to keep afloat. Yeah. So the first thing that I always remind my class, especially when I'm running lab environments, is that you have to recognize that everybody's at a different point in their learning. And more importantly than that, cybersecurity learning does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a context. And you have to consistently enforce that context and remind people about that context. Now, let me give you an example. One of the things that I've been trying really, really hard and across different forums with CISOs and CIOs that I sit with at the table at, as well as with our academic leaders, I've tried my level best and continue to do is change the language with which we teach cybersecurity. I'll give you one example, and I'm going back to somebody that I quoted earlier on, Karen Nimani, but also people like Kat Kood, very famous names in the world of privacy, quite a few other people like Mark Dillon, John Pinard, a resident of Pickering. They've always advocated that we need to rethink and basically restructure the way we talk in the classrooms and talk about cybersecurity. So let's take an example. When you want to go and test an application, let's say Justin's built a web application for intake of clients, for example. And Justin comes to us and says, hey, can you test this application for any vulnerabilities? You know what that process is called of testing? It's called penetration testing. Do you know how many times I've heard female or non-conforming individuals come to me and tell me when they've worked in SOC environments, security operations centers, the guys in the room will always say, yo, let's go pen test that. You know what that means? They're basically referring to, go figure. I want to hold my tongue back on that. But you get what I mean? Language like, let's pen test that. I've heard cases and situations where students have come to me and said, as interns, they've had bosses come to them and say, I'd love to pen test you. So the goal over here for me is to make sure that we're looking at our language from a cybersecurity perspective and rethinking that. Often I'll find myself in environments where students will even make certain jokes where I have to step in. And these are technology-based jokes where at the end of the day, you're basically trying to define the space as a very pro-masculine heterosexual space. And we're trying to constantly address that. So the three things that happen in my classrooms are the following. Number one, I pay, when we were back physical, but I also try to do this online, one of the things that I do is I pay very close attention to how the class is physically set up. Sometimes you'll find a lot of certain types of individuals in the front. Sometimes you'll find, especially when you have international students, sitting somewhere in the back. So one of the first things that I like to do is to mix that up a little bit and mix it up with a bit of a surprise. As I get to know my class a little bit more, and I know the ones that speak, and I know the ones that are very vocal in terms of raising their hands and making a comment or making a suggestion in terms of how I'm suggesting we proceed with a particular product, I will try and mix that ratio up as well. Pair a student who's a little less talkative with somebody who is more vocal. Try to build that within the classroom environment. But I'll tell you the third thing, which I pay a lot of attention to, and that is how I title each element of my curriculum. For example, when I look at the title of this session, you started with the word equity first. You could have started with equality first, but there was a pedagogical reason why you chose equity first. The same thing that I do. These little things, how you title the presentation, how you title the session, all come off very, very powerfully to the class. And I cannot emphasize this more and more. We have great developers. We have great coders. We have great cybersecurity specialists. We don't need more of that. What we need is good developers and coders who can project manage, who can communicate, who can lead teams. Often we find ourselves hiring for skill and firing for fit. And that's where I try to focus a lot of this, is how do we make sure that we're creating the right environments where it's not just about the technical skill, it's about everything else that happens around that. And that's why one of the things that people will tell you when it comes to cybersecurity, it's about people, process, and technology, and in that order. People first, then you go into the process, and then you go into the technology. So that PPT approach has helped me well. I'm not saying that it's a rocket science and I've successfully got very equitable and equality-driven classrooms, but this mission statement that you have is not a product, it's a process, and it's an ongoing one.
No, but so rightfully said, it's about the environment that we set, right? And as individuals, how are we making a difference? That becomes so important. Like, for example, our next question is going to be like, how do we fill the gaps in the health system and in, in other related services? For example, like you said, there is a lot of things which happens, like, the gender biases that happen. For when you're talking about the job market, the women are at loss. But when you're talking about the health system itself, men are at loss. Because when you're talking about abuse, you always think of women being abused. But yes, there are men who are abused too. So are you paying equal attention to them? Are you providing that equitable approach to both the genders or all the genders that are there? Are you talking about all the genders in the first place? You're leaving out so many genders, but do they have equal space or life in this society, in this community? And how do you change it? You're not even talking about it. So start talking about it as an individual. If you take those small steps, it is going to happen. So Justin, this is for you, starting with you. How do you fill those gaps? What are some of those gaps, and how do you ensure that, it is enforced within the society?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to open that conversation. And I'll just say, my focus is on filling gaps. In fact, that is kind of my day job and that's why we started the Center for Men and Families, was really as a consequence of understanding that there were some serious health and community service gaps for boys, men, fathers, and their families. That's our target population. But I want to just say up front, it's not a competition. It's not that we're saying men are as a group, more important than women, or that any group's more important than another. It's just that there are gaps there, and we want to work alongside other agencies that are filling gaps for programs for women, programs for LGBT members, etc. This is our unique contribution, and we're proud to be working with police agencies and victim service agencies and many others to collaboratively fill many gaps as we can and make sure that nobody's left behind. But having said that, yeah, let me point to 3 particular areas where we are focused on boys, men, fathers, and their families. One is parenting programs for fathers. So we take it as a kind of a premise that involved fathers with strong relationships with their children is good for not just the dad and the children, but mom and the whole family. And that whether that's within intact families or post-separation divorce, we want to try to keep children and their dads connected as much as we can. And there is research that controls for socioeconomic variables, and it does find that father involvement correlates with many positive outcomes, pro-social outcomes, healthy, pro-health outcomes, that sort of thing. So it's not about a competition with mothers, it's just acknowledging that dads and moms both have unique contributions and making sure that there are programs for dads as there are for mothers. So we have a program called Fathering After Separation or Divorce. I'm not giving that as a commercial, but it is our kind of contribution in this particular space. I will say a lot of the programs for fathers are things like the Caring Dads program, and that does fill a gap, but the focus there is exclusively fathers who have harmed their children or put their children at risk. So that's an important piece, but that's pretty much all there is for dads. So it's kind of ironic. It assumes that to be kind of eligible for a fathering program, you have to have done something wrong. Well, what about programs just for dads who want to be better dads or moms who want to be better moms? There needs to be more parenting supports there, and that's what we're trying to fill, and what I'd encourage other agencies to look at for their programming as well. And the theme I want to continue to come back to, I'll start here with fathering programs, is this isn't just about dad. This is about the whole family and the larger community. So our belief is when fathers are more engaged, we alleviate the childcare burden being exclusively or mostly on mom, which frees mom up to maybe re-enter the workforce, for example, and it promotes healthier families. The second of the 3 I'm going to give you, trauma-focused services. So this has been mentioned before, but programs including residential facilities or shelters for men escaping domestic violence. It does happen to men. And there are, in Canada, nationally, almost no residential facilities where, and this is the critical piece, where a dad can go with his children. So yeah, if you're a homeless man, there are shelters and they have issues. So we'll leave that for another maybe point in this discussion or another day. But there's really nothing at all that's like a family shelter for a dad and his children. So it puts the dad in an impossible situation in cases of family violence. He either stays to protect the child or to just be with the child, and then he's maybe subjecting himself to continued abuse, or at least the risk of it, or he leaves and he's now leaving his child with potentially an abuser, or at least he's having to separate from his child. So we've opened a shelter. It's the first in Ontario. There needs to be many more of those. And again, back to my theme, the reason this is important, not just for men, but for families and communities, is intergenerational transmission of violence. We know that when somebody has been a victim of domestic violence, they're more likely to pass that on. It's just an unfortunate fact, either to re-enter another abusive relationship, or themselves to become an abuser, or children who witness abuse more likely again to become abusers or to enter abusive relationships when they grow up and they have romantic relationships of their own. It's not a judgment, it's just the research does show that. So if we intervene, regardless of the gender of the victim in this particular case, down the road, we're actually going to be saving a lot of people from some very negative consequences. And the third one, I'm almost done here, is I would say educational campaigns. We have them not nearly enough for women. And again, it's about renormalizing or resocializing women and girls to see themselves as capable of doing anything, going into the STEM professions, for example. I mentioned that earlier. But what about educational programs to, for example, teach men that if you get hurt or if you're in crisis, you don't have to take it like a man anymore. You can be vulnerable. You can ask for help. We don't have very many campaigns like that. There are a few, and I'm glad to see them. But we need a lot more of that to socialize men or re-socialize men to accept being vulnerable. And again, that would help everybody, because if a man deals with his problems in a positive and healthy way, he's not going to deal with them in a harmful way, in a way where he might hurt himself or maybe others, because men can do that too, undeniably. So all of these things I really want to emphasize again, they're not about pitting men against women. They're actually the reverse of that. They're acknowledging we live in a co-ed society for the most part. Men and women interact all the time, and anything that helps men or women do a better job of managing, let's say, their health or any crisis they're in, is bound to have a benefit on all members of society.
Absolutely agree with Justin. I just want to touch on the last point where you're saying that, it is okay not to be strong. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be vulnerable, right? So I feel it has to start at a very young age. It has to start at school. You
Yes.
have to let the schools have that mental health space. You have to have, like, every week, every day, you have the gym times. So you need to have that mental health workshops every day, or at least once a week, to bring that in, to say that is okay to be emotional. You don't have to, you can be strong and emotional at the same time.
Yeah.
It's fine, right? So we have been trying at Public Allies to get that message across to all the school boards. Let's hope it goes through.
And the only
Sandra.
last thing I'll say, because I
Yeah.
really love what you
Yeah,
just
go
said,
ahead.
is
Yeah.
being vulnerable is being strong. And that's what we try to
Yes,
say. We're trying to
absolutely.
encourage men to reimagine strength as being willing to ask for help, because it's not easy. And if you do something that's not easy, that's a form of strength, right? So I think a lot of men kind of appreciate that reimagining of what it means to be strong.
And when you talk about family, and it's just not moms who take care of kids. I've seen a lot of dads. I love my dad, and I've seen him take care of his grandkids too. So men do take care, and there has to be facilities, residential facilities, which can take in the families, fathers and kids there. So I think that's a wonderful topic to explore in future as well. Sandra, go
Absolutely.
ahead.
Yes. Justin, where are you located? I'm in Toronto. Where's everybody from?
I am as well. Our agency is national, so we've got
Okay.
centers, albeit they're modest offices, but we do what we can out of
Okay.
Ottawa,
Okay.
little community called St. Thomas, which is near London, Ontario,
Yep.
and then in Calgary and Vancouver.
Okay.
But I'm at the national office here in Toronto.
Oh, really? I love what you're talking about. Love it, love it. Yes, there's something I'm speaking at called Man to Man. It's specifically in the city here. And when you're speaking, I'm thinking of the intergenerational, you mentioned it, multi-generational component of this is so fierce. And there's a gentleman that he's kind of like, if he was a guru, he would be mine, one of them anyway. His name is Tommy Curry, psychologist. He's a black man. He did a tremendous amount of research on how black men were actually looked at during slavery. They were genderless. They were almost, they looked the same pretty much as they would see women. They didn't recognize them as men anyway. And there's a whole stats and stuff that he did around this. Amazing psychologist, Tommy Curry. And I've heard him speak a number of times online. But the interesting thing when you look into this and you see how our men have, because our women had to, there's a lot to this though. Our women had to put themselves on the line a lot to protect our men. And a lot of the times they had to use their bodies to do this. Anyway, and that being said, that's another 8 hours. But where I'm getting at is there's a whole component in terms of identity and manhood and what that looks like for us fundamentally as a people. And I think about what you were talking about, and that's why I would love to get in touch with you and just continue a little bit more of this conversation, because man to man deals a lot with men that are, going through the system, a lot of, disparities there, there's a lot of multi-generational, intergenerational trauma that has been passed on. And there's a thing called seasoning, and the abuse of slavery is the seasoning part of this has to do with either rape, sodomy. It was all about power and seasoning our men. And so if our men we lost a lot of men. So intergenerationally, our men would try, people thought, we weren't fighting or we weren't kicking back. We've lost so many men trying to fight for their families, fight to save. So what women did, we ended up, I say we because I got epigenetics and DNA of somebody that looked like me back in the time warp. But we ended up protecting our boys. If Massa would say something like, oh, look at Kunta Kinte, look at him, how he picking that cotton, he's so good. And he'd be saying this to the mother. And the mother would say, oh no, he's stupid. Oh, he's ignorant, look at him. I have to hit him in his head to get him out there to do anything. But why would she do this? Because she doesn't want him to be sold away. So there's this thing that goes through our generations. We try to protect our boys. And it's an amazing psychological component to this and what it did to the dehumanization of our men and how they handle family. But there's a lot of this, and there's a lot of healing. We have some amazing people that have come through. but it depends on your bags and how much of that continued to perpetuate itself as you went on in the generation. So I think of this, and so we honor our men a lot in what we do. And it sounds exactly like you do too, no matter what it looks like, you know, whatever they're going through. But there's a lot of people, men that want to keep their kids. And again, you know, it's like you were talking about mediation there, Jane, and I think, oh my gosh, there should be some sort of the men that really want to keep their children and are having so much difficulty doing so. And there's another dehumanization factor there as well.
Thank you, Sandra. But we have to keep on time. So
Sure.
let's go to Jana. Jana, what are the gaps that you would like to be filled and how do you see that happen?
I think it comes back to, I mean, my big thing, sort of my big takeaway from all of this is funding for nonprofits, because a lot of times when, you know, there are, you know, kids that need to break out of these cycles and traumas that, you know, they might not be able to get that from their parents or sort of their immediate family members, but, you know, if they have access to community services, to nonprofits that offer connection points with mentors, you know, they can see someone that is, you know, of their gender, of their sexual orientation, of their skin color, you know, achieving something great, then, you know, they see that, you know, this is achievable. It's not just, you know, sort of pie in the sky type of thing. And sort of reflecting back on my own growth and growing up, like, you know, I'm Chinese, and growing up in my family anyway, you know, kids were valued in terms of, you know, you're good if you're obedient and being quiet. You don't question your elders. So you just listen to what your elders tell you, you take it in and you internalize it. And, you know, that becomes, you know, your own life going forward, right? And it's so, for me, it's sort of breaking out of that, like, I don't know what I don't know, but it's being more open and being more mindful. And like everybody has mentioned throughout our discussions today, being an active listener, right? So to listen for what I don't know and to look for opportunities for where I can educate myself, and to, in my own life, where it is that I can help people, you know, whether it's my clients, whether it's, you know, talking to my nieces and nephews. Again, like, I think it's breaking out of gender roles or sort of systemic things we think about, you know, about a certain people, like discrimination and racism and all of these things, right? So it's trying to break our next generation out of it. I think that's a very important piece. And like you've mentioned, Ayesha, you know, in talking to the school boards about diversity training and, you know, having more awareness and for kids to know that it's okay to cry, it's okay to be sad, that it's okay to express feelings, you know, regardless of where you're from or what gender you are, and to feel that they are able to talk openly about all of these things. So at the end of the day, and one of the things I'll leave off after this is, you know, there's mention of sort of competition of you know, different needs from different groups. And I think that is a real challenge that we have as a society, because, you know, the government only has so much dollars to give to nonprofits or to government agencies to help with these particular groups. And it does drive competition between these groups because, you know, everybody has a need. And so how do we work this out? And that's one of the things that I haven't quite been able to work out yet. And maybe it's a matter of looking to private donors for these nonprofits and these community services to try and help fill some of the gaps that the government is not able to fund.
Yeah, if I should, your permission, if I can just close with something with 30 seconds. You know, I mean, this is fascinating discourse, not entirely my space, but of course, that's why I can learn, because everything that you said is applicable to the classroom. One thing that I'll add to this is, you know, and Justin hinted at it, Sandra too, and Jana, you as well, is the validation process. And one of the things that is working very well for us in the classroom, especially at DC, is gamification and rewards and creating some sort of an accreditation validation process. I know it sounds super simple, but when you do even something like, I was at Canadian Women in Cybersecurity, and just that award for, the Women in Cybersecurity Award or the Student in Cybersecurity Award. And that kind of recognition from senior individuals always goes a long way and propels people to act in certain ways and gets them to think about certain things. I think the second thing which we really need to be paying attention to is how people learn certain behaviors, etc. And now with the evolution of tools like Minute School, Luminous, etc., gamification and badges, people achieving different badges in society and what those badges translate to when we interact with one another all has some very important implications. And when I see new students coming into the college and when I'm able to speak to them from a gamified perspective, it is all influencing the way their characters are being shaped, the way their personalities are being shaped. So I think gamification and this new way of learning is something we need to pay attention to. It's not easy, but slow progress is better than no progress at all. So just my 2 cents, please. I know we're at time, so thank you, Ayesha. This was fantastic. And Ayesha is on mute. The line
Yes,
of 2020 and 2021.
Anybody wants to add anything? You just have a minute, each one of you. No, it's a long topic. I understand. And, it needs to come back probably, and we need to talk about it more. But then it was important for all of us to come together, talk about it. So, in our own spaces, we make a difference. So equity, equality in any area, whether it's employment, government, or health, means that everyone has a fair and just opportunity. This requires removing obstacles in society such as poverty, discrimination, and their consequences, including powerlessness and lack of access to good jobs with fair pay, quality education, housing, safe environments, and healthcare. It also means reducing and ultimately eliminating disparities and its determinants that adversely affect excluded or marginalized groups. But the important question is are these goals that we are going to set measurable when it comes to equity and inclusion? Because what gets measured matters. Just talking about it, setting the goals is easy, but talking about measured goals and at the end of the day, taking an audit of what we have done, like we say, plan, do, action, check, right? So it is important that you do that. It is important that you adapt to these methodologies where you're measuring what is happening. As you develop a framework for addressing equity, you must also find ways to measure, quantify, and report on this important work, especially when working to dismantle systems that have been in place for years and sometimes decades. It's important to have clear goals and benchmarks, even small ones along the way. And what we do in our individual spaces matters a lot. So thank you everyone for this wonderful roundtable. I have learned so much today. I have to go back and think about it and see this again. So everyone, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank
having
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ayesha,
Take
for
care.
hosting.
You
And
guys.
for all the viewers, we will see you back again on Tuesday with the business promotion. Take care and have a good evening.